The millionaire never visited her grave. Not once in 18 years. But the day he finally did, he saw a girl standing there in a white blouse, one who looked exactly like him. She whispered 4 words that shattered everything he thought he knew: "She was my mother." What came next unraveled the biggest secret of his life. Andrew Lawson had always been good at avoiding the past. He didn't dwell on memories or look back over his shoulder. That was how he'd built an empire: forward, always forward. He ran his life like a strategy game, calculated, controlled, impenetrable. And for 18 years, it had worked. 18 years of headlines, mergers, private jets, and a reputation so precise it was almost myth. But there was one place he had never gone, not once, not even out of curiosity: a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of the city where someone who once meant everything to him was buried beneath a name carved in stone. He hadn't been there when they lowered her into the ground. He hadn't sent flowers. He hadn't written a eulogy. He'd done what he did best: vanished behind work, ambition, silence. Cassandra Reeves had died in 2006, and Andrew had sealed that grief inside like a locked vault. For the world, she became a forgotten chapter. For him, she was a ghost he never dared face. But something about this summer morning was different. Maybe it was the way the air felt too still, or how the sky looked too bright for the heaviness in his chest. Maybe he was just tired of pretending. Whatever the reason, he found himself behind the wheel of his own car, driving without telling anyone where he was going. No driver. No assistant. No suit. Just a man, finally making a visit he should have made long ago. The cemetery was nearly empty. Grass gently swayed in the breeze, and the path curved between rows of headstones, each one with its own quiet story. He hadn't needed directions. He knew exactly where she was. He walked without hurry, his footsteps steady but slow, like each one took something out of him. Her grave was simple. A small white stone with her name, birthdate, and the year she left the world. No epigraph. Just her name, Cassandra Reeves, and a silence that settled over him like dust. He stood there for a long time, not knowing what to say. Not even sure why he came. Then he saw her. A girl, maybe 17 or 18, standing just a few steps away. She wore a white blouse, loose around the shoulders, her dark hair falling down her back in soft waves. She wasn't crying. She was just there. Still. Focused. She knelt to adjust a bouquet of wildflowers resting at the base of the stone, then placed her hand gently on the top of the marker as if it were familiar. Intimate. Something in Andrew's chest tightened. When she turned and looked at him, it hit harder than any business loss, harder than betrayal or heartbreak or regret. Because he wasn't just looking at a stranger. He was looking at someone with his eyes. She stared at him, her gaze calm but curious, and for a moment, time stopped. Andrew couldn't move. He couldn't speak. His world, so tightly built, so carefully preserved, cracked like glass under pressure. And then she spoke. Her voice was soft, but firm. She was my mother. It didn't register at first. The words floated in the air between them, and Andrew tried to make sense of them, as if his brain refused to connect the pieces. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but she had already turned away. She walked down the path with a kind of peace that made the moment feel even more unreal. And he was left standing at a grave he had avoided for nearly 2 decades, staring after a girl who looked just like him. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she lived, what she believed, or what she had been told. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. That girl was his. Andrew didn't remember walking back to his car. He didn't remember the gravel crunching under his shoes or the way the summer heat clung to his skin. His mind was a blur of fragmented thoughts and impossible realizations, looping on the same image over and over: the girl's face, her voice, the calm way she said the words, "She was my mother." It echoed inside his chest with the weight of a truth he hadn't even begun to understand. He sat behind the wheel for nearly an hour, unmoving, staring at the steering wheel as if it might provide an answer. He couldn't drive away. Not yet. Not until he knew what any of this meant. Eventually, he pulled out his phone and opened a private contact he hadn't used in years, someone from his legal team who specialized in quiet background investigations. When the man answered, Andrew didn't waste time on greetings. He gave him the name, Sky Winters. He didn't know how he knew it was hers, but he was certain. Something about her presence at that grave hadn't felt random. It had felt anchored, like she belonged there. And when he'd looked into her eyes, his eyes, he knew this wasn't coincidence. Later that night, Andrew returned to his apartment, though it didn't feel like home. The skyline through his windows glittered like always, but there was a sharp emptiness in it now, as if something had shifted in the structure of the world and he was just beginning to notice the cracks. He poured himself a glass of scotch, but it sat untouched on the counter while he stood at the window, replaying the scene at the cemetery in his mind. He remembered Cassandra's smile. Her laugh. The way she used to hum when she was nervous. And then he thought of what she must have carried alone. Pregnant. Alone. Gone before he even knew. He had spent so many years being angry at her for leaving, never knowing she had stayed long enough to bring someone else into the world. The next morning, his investigator called. The girl's name was indeed Sky Winters. 18 years old. Born in late summer, just a few months after Cassandra's accident. Raised in a small town outside the city by a woman named Sarah Winters, who had officially adopted her as an infant. No record of the father. No public custody battle. No newspaper stories. Just a quiet life. Private school. Honors student. Talented in music. Planning to study composition. There were no red flags, no hidden scandals, just a girl living a life she had been given, entirely unaware that her very existence was about to upend someone else's. Andrew didn't hesitate. He needed to see her again. Not through a file. Not through photographs. In person. But he also knew that showing up at her door uninvited would only raise more questions, maybe even fear. So he called in a favor from a friend who sat on the board of a nearby arts college where she had recently applied. With a few quiet calls, he learned that she spent her afternoons volunteering at a local youth center, teaching kids how to play piano. She hadn't listed it on any application. It was something she did on her own. That said more to him than anything else in her file. The next day, he walked into the center just before sunset, dressed simply, no tailored suit, no security detail, no watch worth more than most people's rent. He wanted to be no one. Just a man looking for answers. She was there, sitting at a dusty upright piano surrounded by children. Her back was straight, her fingers moving gently over the keys, guiding a small boy through a clumsy rendition of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." She looked at home there. Focused. Alive. He waited until the children had been picked up and she was gathering her things. When she noticed him, her eyes narrowed slightly with recognition but not fear. Just curiosity. "You followed me," she said. It wasn't an accusation. Just a fact. "I had to," Andrew replied quietly. "I think you know why." She paused, her hands resting on the piano. Then she spoke, slower this time, as if testing each word before letting it go. "Did you know her? My mother?" "I did," he said. "I loved her." A long silence stretched between them. Sky looked down, fiddling with a set of sheet music, her expression unreadable. "I always wondered," she said softly. She didn't talk about him. "I asked once. She said he wasn't ready. I didn't know if that meant he didn't want me. Or if he didn't know." "I didn't know," Andrew said. "Not until yesterday." She looked at him then, really looked. And now that you do? He didn't have a perfect answer. He didn't have a polished speech. All he could offer was the truth. I'm here. And she nodded, just once. Not in forgiveness. Not in acceptance. But maybe, a beginning. Skye didn't ask him to leave, but she didn't invite him to stay either. After a moment of silence, she gathered her things, slung a canvas bag over her shoulder, and walked toward the door of the music room. Andrew followed, a few steps behind, unsure of what came next but unwilling to let the moment slip away. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot outside. They walked side by side without speaking, the air between them thick with unspoken questions and a strange, fragile tension that neither of them knew how to name. At the edge of the lot, she finally stopped and turned to him. Her expression wasn't angry, but it wasn't open either. It was cautious, the way someone looks at a stranger who might be something more. I don't know what you want from me, she said quietly. I don't even know who you are, not really. I don't want anything, Andrew said, his voice softer than he expected. I'm not here to interfere with your life, or take anything away from you. I needed to see you. I needed to know you were real. She looked away, watching a car pull out of the lot, headlights cutting across the pavement. So what now? She asked. You show up, tell me you loved my mom, that you didn't know about me, and then what? We pretend we're a family? You start sending birthday cards? Is that the plan? Her words weren't cruel, but they hit him harder than anything he'd heard in years. Because he knew she wasn't wrong to question him. He had no roadmap for this. No idea how to suddenly become something in her life when he hadn't even been a name in it before yesterday. I don't have a plan, he admitted. But I want to be honest with you. I didn't know about you, not until I saw you standing at her grave. And when I did, everything inside me shifted. I know that doesn't mean much to you right now, but it's the truth. Skye nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. She used to sing when she cooked, she said suddenly. Not real songs. Just made up little melodies. Sometimes she'd hum the same tune over and over for weeks until it drove me crazy. And then she'd switch to something else. I never understood why, but I miss it now. Andrew's chest tightened. He could hear it in his mind, the sound of Cassandra humming while stirring something on the stove, the quiet rhythm of her voice filling the apartment they used to share. She always hummed when she was nervous, he said. Or when she was thinking about something she couldn't say out loud. Skye looked at him again, and this time there was something softer in her eyes. Not trust. Not yet. But a flicker of connection. A thread. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel, she said. It's like. I spent my whole life imagining who he was. Sometimes I thought he was dead. Other times I pictured someone awful, like a bad movie character. And now you're just, here. I'm not here to replace anything, Andrew said. I just want to know you, if that's something you're willing to let happen. She didn't answer. Not directly. But after a pause, she said, there's a coffee shop across the street. If you're not in a hurry. He wasn't. Not even a little. They sat in the corner of a quiet cafe for nearly an hour. She didn't tell him everything, and he didn't press. But he learned that she played guitar as well as piano. That she wrote music late at night when she couldn't sleep. That she hated math but loved astronomy. That her mother had died when she was 10 and that Sarah had done everything she could to keep her safe, loved, and curious. He told her little pieces too. That he wasn't good at relationships. That he built walls instead of bridges. That he had spent the past decade convincing himself that being alone was easier, safer, more productive. And that maybe, just maybe, he'd been completely wrong. When they left, the sky had turned violet, and the streetlights had flickered on. She didn't hug him. She didn't make any promises. But before walking away, she looked back over her shoulder and said, "I'll let you know if I want to talk again." And for the first time in years, Andrew felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since Cassandra died. Hope. The days that followed were quiet in the kind of way that made everything feel more uncertain than calm. Andrew found himself checking his phone more than usual, reading and rereading their brief text exchange as if something new might appear each time. Sky hadn't reached out again since their talk at the cafe, but she hadn't shut the door either. And that, strangely, was enough to keep him anchored in a space between waiting and wondering. He didn't want to push her. He didn't want to make demands. She was 18. Her life was her own. But there was a new ache in his chest now, one he couldn't quite name, a mixture of guilt, longing, and the overwhelming realization of how much time he'd lost without even knowing it. He started waking up earlier, but not for meetings. His usual routine of back-to-back calls and filtered assistance felt hollow, and for the first time, he handed over entire blocks of his calendar to Monica with a simple request: make room. He didn't know what for. Just that his days needed air now, and not just deadlines. Late one afternoon, he drove back to the small town where Sarah and Sky lived. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't even know if he'd stop the car. But something about being closer helped him think. He ended up parked outside a modest white house with a narrow porch and faded green shutters. It was quiet. Peaceful. There were flower pots along the steps and a wind chime that clinked gently in the breeze. He hadn't planned to knock. But when the front door opened, Sarah stood there with a calm, tired expression, like she'd been expecting him all along. She didn't smile, but she didn't look surprised either. She gestured for him to come in, and without speaking, he followed. The house was simple but warm. Framed photos lined the walls, Sky at different ages, some with missing teeth, some with wild curls and paint-covered hands. It felt lived in, loved, like a real home. They sat at the kitchen table, a pot of tea between them. She poured him a cup without asking, then sat across from him with her hands folded. "I figured we'd have this conversation eventually," Sarah said quietly. "You didn't know." "I believe that. But now that you do, I have to ask, what are you looking for?" Andrew looked down at the steam rising from his cup before answering. "I don't know," he admitted. "I thought I just wanted to see her, to know she was real. But now I can't stop thinking about the years I missed. About everything she's been through that I wasn't there for. I don't want to take anything from you. I want a chance to be in her life. Even a small part." Sarah nodded, her eyes steady. "She's not a little girl anymore. She doesn't need permission from me. She makes her own choices. But I'll tell you this, Cassandra loved her more than anything. And she did what she thought was right. She was scared. She didn't know if you'd reject the baby, and she didn't want her daughter growing up with that kind of pain. So she stayed quiet. When she died, I promised I'd protect Sky the best I could. That meant letting her believe what was simplest, that her mother made all the choices for a reason. That her father wasn't part of the story." Andrew swallowed hard. He imagined Cassandra alone, pregnant, hiding the truth because she thought he wouldn't want it. He had been so focused on his future back then, so obsessed with building his empire that he hadn't seen what he could have had. What had been just out of reach. "I never got to say goodbye," he said. "To Cassandra. I buried it all. And now there's this young woman who's part of me and I don't know how to start over. I don't even know how to start." Sarah's voice softened. "Then don't try to be a father right away. Don't show up with answers or plans. Just be there. Let her lead. Let her ask the questions. If she lets you in, it won't be because of what you say. It'll be because you stayed." The word stayed with him even after he left, driving back through dusk and into darkness. He didn't text Sky that night, but he wrote a message he didn't send. A message that said he was proud of her, even if he had no right to be yet. That he hoped one day she'd share her music with him. That he missed someone he'd only just begun to know. He deleted it before hitting send, but something had shifted. The silence between them didn't feel like distance anymore. It felt like the beginning of trust. 3 weeks passed before Sky reached out again. It came as a short message on a Sunday evening, long after Andrew had given up checking his phone with any real hope. The text simply read, *, would you come to my recital? *. It was followed by a time, a location, and nothing else. No greeting, no emoji, no explanation. And yet, Andrew stared at the message for almost 5 minutes before answering. Yes. I'll be there. It was the first invitation she'd offered him to be part of her world, and he treated it with the quiet weight of something sacred. The recital was being held in a small performance hall attached to the town's community college. He arrived early and sat near the back, not wanting to seem like he was pushing his way forward into something that wasn't yet his. The room was modest but filled with warmth, folding chairs lined in neat rows, a grand piano on stage, and a small printed program that listed Sky as the third performer of the evening. Her name sat simply between 2 others, unbolded, without fanfare, just Sky Winters, original composition. As the lights dimmed and the first student walked out to play, Andrew couldn't stop glancing down at her name, reading it again and again as if it would help him understand her better. It struck him then that he didn't know what kind of music she loved. He didn't know who her favorite composer was or how long she'd been writing songs. These small pieces of her life were still a mystery, and he hated how much of her past he'd already missed. When she finally walked out onto the stage, dressed in a simple black dress with her hair pulled back, he felt his breath catch in his throat. She looked calm, composed, but her fingers fidgeted slightly at her sides. She sat at the piano without looking at the audience and took a deep breath before playing. The first note was soft, hesitant, almost like a whisper. Then came the second. And the third. The melody unfolded gently at first, a slow cascade of chords that felt like rain on glass. It was haunting and delicate and painfully beautiful. There was sadness in it, yes, but there was also resilience, like the sound of someone learning to speak again after years of silence. Andrew didn't realize he was holding his breath until the final note faded and the room erupted into applause. Sky stood, nodded politely, and walked off stage with the same quiet grace she'd entered with. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look for him. But he clapped anyway, harder than anyone else in the room. After the recital ended, he waited near the exit, unsure if she would come find him or if this had simply been a test to see if he would show up at all. She emerged from the dressing area 20 minutes later, her coat slung over her arm, and stopped when she saw him. "You came," she said, her tone somewhere between surprise and relief. "Of course I did," he replied. They stood in silence for a moment while the last of the audience trickled out around them. Then she handed him a folded piece of paper. It was the sheet music to the song she'd just played. At the top, in pencil, she had written, "What I never said." He looked down at the page, stunned. "I wrote it last year," she said. "Before I knew who you were. I didn't know why I wrote it then. I do now." Andrew's voice was barely audible. "It was beautiful. I wasn't sure if I wanted you there," she admitted. "But I'm glad you came." He nodded slowly. "I'm glad you let me." They walked out into the cool night air together. He didn't reach for her hand, didn't try to fill the silence with meaningless talk. He let her lead. That had been Sarah's advice, and now he understood what she meant. Let her guide the steps, because every one she offered was a gift. As they reached her car, Sky stopped and looked up at him. "I'm not ready for everything," she said. "But maybe I'm ready for something." He smiled, Not wide, not triumphant, just a quiet curve of the lips that meant everything. Something is more than enough. She nodded, got into her car, and drove away. And Andrew stood there in the parking lot, holding the sheet music to a song written before she ever knew his name, knowing that somehow, against every odd, this was how their story had begun. Sky didn't text again for a week, but Andrew didn't take it as rejection. He understood now that her silence wasn't a wall, it was space. A way of processing. She moved carefully through her emotions, like someone who had spent years learning not to get too attached to what she couldn't count on. He didn't blame her. She had every right to be cautious with him. He had shown up out of nowhere, carrying a past she never asked for and a truth that had shifted the way she saw her own reflection. So he waited. Not because he had to, but because she was worth waiting for. During that week, Andrew found himself thinking about her constantly. He tried to stay busy, returning to work and handling the essentials, but everything that used to feel urgent now seemed distant. Board meetings felt more like noise. Deals he once would have fought for with sharp teeth now left him hollow. Something inside him had reoriented, and no one around him really understood it. Monica noticed, of course. She had been with him long enough to read his moods before he even voiced them. "You're quieter than usual," she said one afternoon as they reviewed logistics for a potential expansion. "Different." Andrew looked up from the table, considering how to respond. "I think I just, finally realized that what I'm building doesn't mean anything if I have no one to share it with." Monica raised an eyebrow. "Is this about her?" He didn't answer directly. He just nodded once, and she let it be. 2 days later, he received a message from Sky. It was brief, but this time it came with something more than words, a photo. She had taken a picture of the piano at her old high school's auditorium, dusty, a few chipped keys, but clearly loved. The message underneath read, "I used to stay after class to practice on this when I didn't want to go home. Thought you'd get why." Andrew stared at the image for a long time, running his thumb over the screen like he could reach through it. She was giving him pieces now. Small ones, yes, but pieces nonetheless. He replied with a photo of his old turntable, the one Cassandra used to tease him about for being too sentimental and scratched. Beneath it, he wrote, "She used to play records in the morning. Nina Simone. Joni Mitchell. Sometimes I just let it run without turning up the volume. I still do." She didn't answer right away, but the next day she sent him a voice memo, just a short recording of a melody she was working on, no lyrics, just soft chords on the guitar and a humming line that wrapped around itself like thread. He listened to it 5 times in a row, each time hearing something different. There was a sadness in it, but not defeat. It sounded like the beginning of something being rebuilt. That weekend, she asked if he'd meet her for lunch. Not coffee. Not just a quick check-in. Lunch. It was a subtle shift, but he felt it immediately. When he arrived at the small cafe she'd chosen, a place near a bookstore, tucked away behind blooming hedges, she was already there, waiting outside with her hair in a loose braid and a book clutched under one arm. He smiled as he approached, but didn't rush. She didn't like being overwhelmed, and he respected that. They sat at a quiet table near the window. She ordered tomato soup and a grilled cheese. He got the same, just to make her smirk. It worked. They talked about normal things, music she liked, professors she didn't, the strange way time moved during winter in small towns. Then, without warning, she looked up at him and said, "Do you think she would have told me eventually? If she hadn't died?" He didn't flinch. "Yes. She would have told you. I think she was trying to protect both of us, in the only way she knew how." Sky nodded slowly. She was good at that. At keeping things safe, even if it meant hurting herself. "She was," he said, his voice catching more than he wanted. "She protected me more than I deserved." Skye leaned back in her chair, sipping her drink. Sometimes I think I'm a little like her. But other times, I wonder if I'm more like you. Andrew's heart tightened at that. I hope you're the best of both of us. She looked at him thoughtfully. I think I might be. But I still have a lot to figure out. We can figure it out together, he said gently. One step at a time. She didn't say yes. But she didn't say no. When they left the cafe, the air had turned crisp, and she walked beside him without needing space between them. Just as they reached her car, she turned and handed him the book she'd been holding all along. It was a worn poetry collection with notes scribbled in the margins. Inside the cover, she had written just 2 words. Keep this. He didn't ask why. He didn't have to. It was her way of letting him in, not with grand declarations, but with something real. Something earned. And for the first time in a long time, Andrew Lawson felt like he belonged somewhere again. Winter arrived slowly that year, as if the season itself was hesitant to disturb the quiet rhythm Skye and Andrew had begun to build. Their meetings had become regular, but unspoken in schedule. Sometimes it was a shared lunch, other times it was just a few exchanged messages or voice notes about a new melody she was working on, or a photo he'd found of Cassandra smiling in an old sunlit apartment. The connection between them was cautious but real, stitched together by vulnerability and small acts of trust. They didn't talk about what they were yet. Neither of them was ready to define it. But it was growing, and both of them knew it. One cold Saturday morning, Skye invited him to her apartment for the first time. It was small, second floor, with creaky wooden floors and a window that let in more wind than light. But it was hers. There were guitar picks scattered across a desk, post-it notes on the walls with half-written lyrics, and a shelf filled with books that had clearly been read more than once. Her life was carefully built around art, music, and quiet independence. It was nothing like the penthouse Andrew lived in, and he realized how little of his home felt personal in comparison. She made coffee, strong and slightly burnt, and they sat on the couch, knees almost touching. A record player in the corner played something lo-fi and gentle. She didn't speak right away, just watched him glance around the room as if trying to memorize it. I used to think about this, she said finally. What it would feel like if he ever showed up. If I'd let him in here, into this space that's only ever been mine. Andrew didn't respond right away. He knew better now than to fill her silences with noise. Instead, he waited. I thought I'd be angry, she continued. That I'd slam the door and tell him he didn't get to just walk into my life because he finally decided he wanted to. But now, I don't know. It's like I'm angry at someone who doesn't even exist. The version I made up in my head. You're not him. I'm not sure who I am yet, Andrew admitted, voice low. But I want to be someone worth knowing. She looked at him then, not with judgment, but with a kind of quiet analysis, like she was still fitting puzzle pieces together in her mind. You know, for a billionaire, you're really bad at resting. He smiled faintly. I never learned how. Well, she said, you're sitting on my lopsided couch drinking coffee I probably burned. That's a start. She got up and walked to her desk, rummaging through a drawer before pulling out an envelope. When she returned, she handed it to him and sat back down, arms crossed tightly over her chest as if bracing for impact. I found this last week, she said. In a box of her old stuff I hadn't looked through in years. It's addressed to you. I didn't read it. I thought you should be the one. Andrew stared at the envelope in his hands. His name was written in Cassandra's familiar script, the ink slightly faded but unmistakable. He turned it over slowly, hesitating. Part of him wasn't sure he was ready to read anything from her again. Another part had waited 18 years for this. He opened it. The letter was short. Simple. But every word carried weight. Cassandra had written it not long before the accident. She'd known she was pregnant. She'd been scared. But she'd also said something that caught in his throat, if you're reading this, I hope she's found you. And I hope you let her be everything she was meant to be, not because she's yours, but because she's hers. He read it twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it back into the envelope. When he looked up, Sky was watching him closely, but not with pity. Just presence. She never hated you, Sky said softly. She just didn't want you to feel trapped. She didn't think you were ready. I wasn't, he said. But I would have tried. I wish she'd let me try. I think you're trying now, Sky replied. And that's more than most people ever do. That night, as snow began to fall outside, they made dinner together. It was chaotic, slightly undercooked, and absolutely perfect in its imperfections. She laughed when he dropped a spoon into the sauce. He laughed when she burned the garlic bread. And for the first time since she'd stepped into his life, the tension between them dissolved into something easier. Something lighter. Afterward, they sat on the couch again, shoulder to shoulder, the warmth of the room closing around them like a soft promise. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. And when Andrew finally left hours later, stepping out into the quiet snow, he didn't feel like a visitor anymore. He felt like someone who had been given a second chance, and this time, he didn't plan to waste it. Spring came early that year. The snow melted quickly, and the air turned soft with warmth, the kind that didn't announce itself but lingered on the skin just long enough to feel like hope. Andrew had always measured time in quarters and fiscal years, in deadlines and launches. But now, time felt different. It passed in music notes and walks through bookstores, in phone calls that didn't start with business and in dinners that didn't end with strategy. For the first time in years, his life wasn't about control, it was about presence. Sky had grown more comfortable with him. There was still space between them, but it no longer felt like a wall. It was simply part of the rhythm they'd created. They saw each other often, sometimes just to sit in silence while she practiced guitar or worked through lyrics. She didn't feel the need to entertain him, and he didn't feel the need to impress her. That alone was its own kind of intimacy. And Andrew found himself laughing more than he ever had before, not polite, performative laughter, but deep, real moments of joy that surprised even him. One Saturday, she invited him to a performance at a community fundraiser. It wasn't a formal event, just a small gathering in a local park where local artists and musicians played to raise money for a youth arts program. Sky had volunteered to play a few original songs. He arrived early, like he always did now, and sat in the middle row of folding chairs scattered across the lawn. The sun was warm on his face, and children ran between the trees while volunteers set up tables of snacks and flyers. It was chaotic and joyful, and Andrew found himself wishing Cassandra could see it. Not for his sake, but for Sky's. When Sky walked onto the small stage, she didn't look at him right away. She adjusted the mic, tuned her guitar quickly, and smiled into the sunlight. Then she began to play. Her voice was stronger now, confident but still raw, filled with honesty that couldn't be taught. Each note felt like a step she had taken on her own, each lyric a choice she had made to be seen. The last song she performed was new, one he hadn't heard before, and she introduced it only with the words, "This is for someone I didn't expect to find." It was a quiet melody, simple and stripped back. The lyrics spoke of time lost, of questions left unanswered, but also of choosing to begin anyway. It wasn't a love song in the traditional sense. It was a recognition, a moment offered to someone who had arrived late but stayed. Andrew listened with his eyes closed, and when the final chord faded, he opened them to find her looking straight at him. Later, after the crowd had dispersed and the volunteers had begun packing up, Sky walked toward him with her guitar slung over her shoulder and a quiet, almost shy smile on her face. He stood as she approached, unsure what to say, but she beat him to it. "I want you to meet Sarah," she said. "The woman who raised me." He nodded. "I'd like that." They drove together to the house Andrew had visited once before, only this time, he was welcomed in not as a stranger, but as something closer to family. Sarah greeted him with a nod and a cup of tea, and the three of them sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the trees. They talked about Cassandra, stories both painful and beautiful, things she used to say, the way she could make any room feel like home. There were tears, yes, but laughter too. And by the end of the evening, it no longer felt like something broken they were trying to fix. It felt like something new they were building together. A few weeks later, on Sky's birthday, Andrew gave her a gift he had debated over for months. It wasn't expensive, at least not in his world. Just a handmade leather-bound notebook, with blank pages and a small inscription on the inside cover that read, *, write the songs only you can write. *. She opened it slowly, ran her fingers over the leather, and looked at him with a softness in her eyes that said more than thank you ever could. "I'm not done figuring things out," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "I'm not either." That evening, she played a song just for him. No microphone, no audience. Just the two of them in her apartment, sitting on the floor with the lights low and the windows open. And when she finished, she didn't say anything more. She just leaned her head against his shoulder, and he let her stay there, breathing in the moment like it was something fragile and rare. For the first time in a long time, Andrew didn't feel like a man trying to make up for lost time. He felt like a father. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in the way that mattered most. She had found him. And he had stayed. What makes the ending of this story powerful isn't that everything wraps up neatly, but that it chooses honesty over perfection. Andrew doesn't become a flawless father overnight, and Sky doesn't suddenly forget the years of silence and absence. But they meet each other where they are, two people from different worlds, connected by blood, pain, and possibility. There's beauty in the slow, quiet building of trust, in the choice to stay present even when it's uncomfortable. The ending reminds us that love doesn't always begin at birth. Sometimes, it begins in the middle of life, unexpectedly, and still has the power to grow into something real. It's not about rewriting the past, it's about honoring it, learning from it, and deciding to show up better tomorrow. And that, to me, is what redemption truly looks like. The Millionaire CEO walked into the hospital expecting a routine visit to his ex, but what he saw made his heart stop. 3 little girls. One face. His. What happened next turned his entire life upside down. Nathan Carter wasn't a man who left things unresolved. In the world he built, polished boardrooms, airtight contracts, and carefully curated silence, loose ends didn't exist. That's why the message from a hospital doctor stopped him cold. It was brief, clinical, but impossible to ignore. Claire Evans had been admitted, and her condition was serious. She'd asked for him by name. He read the message twice, then again, as if the meaning might shift on the third read. Claire. 7 years had passed since he'd seen her. 7 years since that last fight, when the words between them had turned sharp and final. She'd left without looking back. He'd buried himself in work, building an empire of steel and order, convincing himself that she belonged to a life he no longer needed. He'd told himself the door had closed. Permanently. But here she was, or rather, here her name was, pulling at something he thought was long dead. He didn't hesitate. For all the ways she had hurt him, for all the silence between then and now, he went. Not out of obligation, and not out of guilt. Something deeper drove him, something rooted in the part of him that had never fully let go. The hospital was cold in that way only medical buildings could be. Clinical, echoing, too bright in some places and too shadowed in others. The front desk clerk gave him the room number with a practiced nod, and he made his way to the elevator, ignoring the itch of anxiety climbing up the back of his neck. He didn't know what he would find. He didn't know what she would say. But he wasn't prepared for what waited outside her door. There, sitting quietly on a bench just beside the room marked Evans, Claire, were 3 little girls. They couldn't have been more than 7, dressed in matching pink dresses with ribbons at the waist. Their shoes dangled above the floor, feet too short to touch the tiles. They weren't playing. They weren't speaking. They just sat, close together, still and alert. Nathan slowed as he approached. Something about them stopped him mid-step. One of the girls looked up. Then the other 2 followed. And that's when he saw it. The eyes. The faces. The hair. They looked exactly like him. Triplets. His heart jolted, a physical reaction he couldn't control. One of the girls tilted her head slightly, curious but calm. "Are you Mr. Carter?" she asked. Her voice was soft, polite, rehearsed. "Mama said you might come today," said the second. The third simply stared at him, wide-eyed, holding onto a small notebook like it was a shield. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The ground didn't just shift, it vanished. Claire had never told him she was pregnant. She had left without a word, and he had spent years building walls high enough to forget. But these children, 3 perfect reflections of him, broke through every layer he'd constructed. He turned toward the door but hesitated, his hand hovering just above the handle. Inside was the woman who had once been his everything. Outside were 3 little girls who might be his. He had come to the hospital expecting to offer closure. Instead, he was standing at the edge of an entirely new beginning. Nathan stood frozen at the threshold, one hand resting on the door handle, the other clenched loosely at his side. Behind him, the 3 girls had gone quiet again, as if they sensed the gravity of the moment. His mind was racing. He tried to calculate what this could mean, how it could even be possible. Triplets. 7 years old. That lined up with the timing of Claire's disappearance, and yet, not once in all these years had there been a clue. Not a word. Not a sign. It was like she had vanished into a void, and now, just as suddenly, the truth had surfaced, 3 faces that mirrored his own, sitting quietly outside her hospital room. He finally gathered himself and pushed the door open, slowly, carefully. The room was dimly lit, quiet except for the soft beeping of machines. Claire lay in the hospital bed, her skin pale against the stark white sheets, her breathing shallow but steady. She looked smaller than he remembered, more fragile, her usual fire dimmed beneath layers of exhaustion. Yet when her eyes fluttered open and found his, something sparked, recognition, pain, and something else, relief. "Nathan," she whispered, her voice dry and thin, but unmistakable. He stepped closer, his heart hammering so loudly he was sure she could hear it. "Claire," he said, struggling to find more words, but they didn't come. So many questions, and yet none of them seemed right to ask. She tried to sit up but winced from the effort, and he gently placed a hand on her shoulder, easing her back into the pillow. "Don't," he said softly. "Just rest." "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I told myself I'd understand if you didn't." "I almost didn't," he admitted, taking the chair beside her bed. "I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if I could face you again." Her eyes glistened. "I'm sorry, Nathan. For everything. For leaving the way I did. For not telling you. I was scared." He inhaled deeply, gripping the armrest as he fought to keep his voice steady. "Are they mine?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd seen it written all over their faces. Claire nodded. "Yes. May, Lily, and Hope. They're yours." Nathan looked down, his vision blurring at the edges. He wasn't angry, he was overwhelmed. 7 years. 7 birthdays. 7 years of first steps, first words, scraped knees, lullabies, and late-night fears. All gone. All lost. And yet, somehow, there was still time. They were still young. They were still here. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, not accusatory, but quietly devastated. "I wanted to," Claire said. 100 times. "But I knew the life you were building. I saw you rising, becoming everything you worked so hard to be. I was afraid that if I told you, it would unravel everything. That you'd come out of obligation, or worse, resentment. I didn't want them to feel unwanted." He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. "You don't get to make that choice for me." "I know," she said. "I know that now." A long silence followed. Machines beeped steadily. Somewhere down the hallway, a child laughed. Nathan sat with his hands clasped in front of him, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "They're outside," he said quietly. "Sitting right outside your room." Claire let out a soft breath. "They've been asking about you every day." "I didn't tell them much, only that there was someone I used to love, someone important. When I got sick, I told them that if anything happened, they should ask the nurses to call you. I didn't know if you'd come, but they deserve to know who you are." He looked up at her again, her face pale but still beautiful, and saw all the pain she had carried alone. All the choices she'd made, flawed, human, terrified. And somewhere deep beneath the ache of missed time, he felt something unexplainable: gratitude. Because she hadn't chosen just silence, she had chosen to protect them, even when it cost her everything. "I want to meet them," he said finally. Claire nodded slowly. "They want to meet you too." He stood, his legs unsteady, and crossed the room. When he opened the door, the girls were still there, their matching dresses a soft pop of color in the otherwise sterile hallway. They looked up at him again, waiting. Watching. Hoping. "I think," he said, voice catching slightly, "we should talk." The three of them stood. May reached for Lily's hand. Hope held her notebook tightly to her chest. They stepped toward him as one, uncertain but open. He knelt down to their level, really looking at them now, not just as strange little girls in a hallway, but as pieces of himself. It was terrifying. And it was miraculous. "My name is Nathan," he said gently. "And I think I have a lot to learn about you." Hope smiled first. A small, brave smile. Then Lily nodded. May didn't speak, but her eyes locked onto his, filled with something that looked a lot like recognition. In that moment, Nathan knew his life had already changed. Not gradually. Not someday. Now. And he wasn't running from it. He was ready to begin. Nathan had always believed that nothing in life could catch him off guard. He had built his career on precision and preparedness, on anticipating outcomes before they happened and outthinking every opponent at the table. But nothing, no boardroom, no hostile takeover, no market crash, had ever made him feel the way he felt now, sitting across from 3 7-year-old girls who looked like younger, softer versions of himself. They sat around the small hospital cafeteria table, their legs too short for the chairs, their pink dresses bright against the sterile surroundings. Each of them had a carton of apple juice in front of them, and a small pack of crackers that none of them had touched. Nathan had offered to take them downstairs for a break while the nurses checked on Claire. He thought it might help, that maybe giving them a change of scenery would make everything feel less fragile. But now, sitting here, he realized he didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to talk to children, not like this, not his children. His daughters. That word still echoed inside his mind like something out of a language he didn't speak yet. Lily, the most outgoing of the three, broke the silence first. "Do you like chocolate cake?" she asked, completely serious, as if it were the most important question in the world. Caught off guard, Nathan let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "I do," he said. "Especially the kind with frosting that's way too sweet." She nodded solemnly, then turned to May and whispered something that made both of them giggle. Hope just watched him, quietly sipping her juice, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle she hadn't quite finished yet. He leaned forward a little. "So, what do you like to do?" "You know, for fun." "Lily likes to draw animals," May said, her voice steady and low. "I like to read. Hope writes songs, but she doesn't let anyone hear them." "I don't write songs," Hope murmured, flushing red. "You do," Lily said. "You just hide them in your notebook." Nathan smiled, heart aching a little at the thought. These girls had entire lives, habits, interests, secrets, that he had missed. They had inside jokes, routines, little sibling roles that he was only now seeing. And the strange part was how easily he wanted to be part of it all. Not as an observer. As their father. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small watch he always carried, not for time, but for memory. Claire had given it to him long ago, when they were young and stupid and in love. He didn't know why he brought it today, but now it felt like the right moment. He placed it on the table. "Your mom gave me this a long time ago," he said. "Back when we thought we had everything figured out." May leaned in to look. Lily tilted her head. Hope stared at it like it held a story she wanted to ask about but wasn't sure she should. "I don't know how much she told you about me," Nathan continued. "But I didn't know you existed until today." Hope blinked. Lily looked away. May nodded once, as if she had expected that. "She said you were busy," May said simply. "And that it wasn't your fault." Nathan felt the sting of those words deeper than he expected. Claire had protected them from the truth, but also from bitterness. Somehow, even in her absence, she had taught them grace. "I want to get to know you," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "If you'll let me." There was a long pause. Not uncomfortable, but full. Full of consideration, of weight, of all the things that needed to settle in their minds before they could decide. Hope looked up first. "Do you have a house with stairs?" He blinked, surprised. "Yes. I do." "Can we visit it?" she asked, tentative, hopeful. "If you want to," he said gently. "Whenever you're ready." Lily nodded firmly. "I want to see your fridge. I bet it doesn't have any snacks." Nathan laughed for real this time. "You might be right." And just like that, something shifted. The air between them warmed. Their voices became more relaxed, their questions more playful. They wanted to know if he could drive fast cars, if he ever fell asleep at work, if he liked cartoons or hated them. He answered everything honestly, even when it made him look ridiculous. It wasn't perfect. It was awkward and halting and unfamiliar. But it was real. When they walked back upstairs, the girls stayed close to him, not clinging, but present, like a small orbit forming around him. When Claire saw them come in together, her eyes filled again, but this time with something softer. Hope climbed into the chair beside her mother. May and Lily sat near the window, watching the sky. Nathan stood beside the bed and met Claire's gaze. "I want to be part of their lives," he said, voice low but firm. "Not just when it's convenient. All of it. School mornings. Nightmares. Piano recitals. Whatever comes." Claire nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You already are," she said. And somehow, he believed her. Nathan had never been more aware of time than he was now. Time that had passed. Time that had been stolen. Time he couldn't get back, no matter how hard he tried. As he sat at the foot of Claire's hospital bed later that evening, watching the slow rhythm of her breathing as she drifted in and out of sleep, he couldn't help but think about the 7 birthdays he had missed, the scraped knees he hadn't kissed, the nightmares he hadn't soothed. Guilt settled deep in his chest, not the sharp, immediate kind, but the kind that lingers like a slow burn. The kind that builds every time he heard one of the girls say something casual that hinted at an entire history he wasn't there for. The nurses said Claire's vitals were stable, but her immune system was fragile, and her body was exhausted. She needed rest, proper care, and support. Nathan made a decision without hesitation. He arranged for a private in-home nurse to be available once she was discharged, and he called his legal team to begin the process of establishing temporary guardianship of the girls in case Claire's condition worsened. He didn't wait for her permission, not because he wanted control, but because he finally understood what it meant to protect someone before they asked for it. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep on the small couch in Claire's room, curled against each other like puzzle pieces, Nathan stepped out into the hallway and called Monica, his longtime assistant. She had seen him through every major merger, every scandal, every last-minute flight to Tokyo or Zurich, but she had never heard his voice like this. Not uncertain. Not composed. Human. He told her everything. She didn't interrupt once. When he finished, there was a long pause on the other end. Then, "Tell me what you need, and I'll handle the rest." The next morning, she arrived at the hospital with a bag full of essentials for the girls: clothes, pajamas, coloring books, even 3 identical toothbrushes with cartoon animals on them. She didn't ask questions. She just moved around him like she always had, quiet and efficient. Nathan watched as she knelt down and greeted the girls like old friends, not clients, not strangers. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something like hope. They didn't go back to his high-rise apartment. He knew instinctively that it wasn't the right place. It was too cold, too quiet, too full of glass and marble and nothing else. Instead, he rented a small house just outside the city, temporary, furnished, but warm. It had a backyard and 3 bedrooms and a porch that creaked when you stepped on it. It wasn't perfect, but it felt more like a beginning than anything else he could offer them. When they arrived, the girls explored with cautious curiosity. Lily immediately claimed the smallest room and asked if she could paint the walls yellow. May wandered into the kitchen and checked every cabinet like she was inspecting the space for hidden problems. Hope found the window seat in the living room and sat there quietly, legs crossed, watching birds outside as if she had been waiting for a window like that her entire life. Nathan stood in the doorway and watched them all, unsure of what to say, of how to begin. It wasn't until Lily tugged at his sleeve and asked, "Do we live here now?" that he realized he didn't need the perfect words. "For as long as you want," he said. "This is your home now." That night, he made them grilled cheese sandwiches that came out slightly burnt but still edible. They sat around a round wooden table that wobbled when someone leaned too hard, and they told him little things: what their teacher's name was, who had the best jokes in class, how May once fell into a pond trying to save a frog. He listened to every word like it was gold. When it was time for bed, they brushed their teeth in a line, all 3 spitting into the sink at once and laughing about it. He tucked each one in, asked if they needed anything, and then stood outside their doors for a while after they'd gone quiet, listening for signs of restlessness or fear. There was none. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the living room with a blanket over his shoulders, Claire's medical report on the table beside him, and a glass of water growing warm in his hand. He stared out the window, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves, and wondered how much one person's life could change in just a few days. The man who had walked into that hospital a few days ago was gone. This man, who burned sandwiches and bought princess-themed toothpaste and learned to braid hair from a YouTube video, was someone entirely new. He didn't know what the next day would bring. He didn't know how to be a perfect father. But he was here. He had shown up. And he was never walking away again. The days that followed felt like a balancing act on unfamiliar ground. Nathan woke early each morning, not to check stock reports or prep for investor meetings, but to quietly walk down the hallway and peek into 3 separate bedrooms to make sure each of the girls was still tucked beneath the blankets. Sometimes Lily had kicked hers off, one leg dangling over the edge of the bed. May usually lay perfectly still, arms crossed beneath her pillow. Hope, almost always, was curled up tight, hugging a stuffed rabbit Monica had picked out. The simple act of seeing them there brought him a peace he couldn't name, but it also deepened the ache in his chest. He was a stranger learning to be needed. The morning routine became sacred, though rarely smooth. Someone always spilled something: orange juice, cereal, toothpaste. Arguments over who got the blue spoon or which hairband matched which dress were now part of Nathan's reality. He learned to tie ponytails that weren't too tight and not too loose. He memorized how May liked her sandwiches cut diagonally, how Hope didn't like anything touching on her plate, and how Lily insisted on packing her own lunch even if it meant there was nothing but crackers and a single banana inside. These weren't details he expected to know at 42, but they became the most important metrics in his life. Claire was still recovering. She'd been discharged but was staying at a small care facility where she could rebuild her strength under supervision. Nathan visited her every day after dropping the girls off at school, sometimes bringing coffee, sometimes just sitting beside her while she rested. They didn't talk about the past much, there was too much in the present that needed tending. But every now and then, when the girls came up in conversation, their eyes would meet and something unspoken passed between them. Regret. Gratitude. A shared understanding that they were rewriting something that had almost been lost. One evening, just after dinner, a knock came at the door. Nathan had just finished helping Lily with her homework while the others drew pictures at the table. He opened it without thinking and came face to face with a man he didn't recognize, mid-50s, pressed shirt, a face that held both familiarity and something cold. The man introduced himself as Richard Evans, Claire's father. Nathan hadn't known he was still alive. Claire had never spoken of him much, only that their relationship had been strained for most of her life. Now here he was, standing at the front door, eyes scanning the hallway behind Nathan before settling on him with a look that held no warmth. "I heard what's happened," Richard said. "About Claire. And the girls." Nathan hesitated, unsure of where this was going. "Claire is recovering. The girls are safe with me." Richard's tone sharpened. "And who exactly decided that? You walk back into her life for 5 minutes and suddenly you're playing father?" Nathan stepped outside, quietly closing the door behind him so the girls wouldn't hear. "I am their father," he said. "And I'm not playing at anything." Richard scoffed, arms crossed. "You don't think it's convenient? That she didn't say a word for 7 years and now suddenly you're a hero?" Nathan kept his voice low, steady. "I didn't come back to be a hero. I came back because I should have been there in the first place. And I'm not going anywhere now." There was a long, charged silence. Then Richard's expression shifted, still cold, but calculated. "I'm petitioning for visitation. Maybe more. Those girls are my grandchildren, whether you like it or not." Nathan felt the heat rise in his chest, but he forced himself to breathe. "You're not going to use them to punish Claire or to make up for what you lost with her. I won't let that happen." "I'll see you in court then," Richard replied, turning on his heel and walking away. Nathan stood on the porch for a long moment, absorbing the reality of what had just happened. Trouble was coming, and not the kind he could buy his way out of. This was going to be personal. Deep. Messy. He stepped back inside and saw all 3 girls watching from the hallway, their eyes wide, sensing something had shifted. He knelt down and opened his arms, and they rushed to him without asking questions. He held them all tightly, suddenly afraid not of losing a company or a fortune, but of losing them. That night, after they'd fallen asleep, he called Claire. Told her what happened. She didn't sound surprised. Just tired. "I knew he'd come eventually," she said. "He doesn't know how to love. Only how to control." Nathan sat in silence, staring at the ceiling in the dark. "I won't let him take them," he said. "I know," Claire replied. And she believed him. For the first time in a very long time, someone truly did. The courtroom felt colder than any boardroom Nathan had ever walked into. It was smaller than he imagined, less grand, almost unimpressive in its plainness. But the weight in the air was heavier than any corporate negotiation he'd ever faced. This wasn't about numbers or contracts. It was about 3 little girls who had only just begun to see him as something steady, someone real. And now, all of it, the trust he'd spent every waking moment building, was at risk of being dismantled by a man who had no part in their lives until now. Richard Evans sat across the room, rigid and silent, his lawyer doing all the talking. They painted a picture of concern, of a grandfather stepping in to do what needed to be done after years of alleged absence by the father. The lawyer spoke about Nathan's career, his wealth, his status, subtly implying that he was too busy, too distant, too emotionally unavailable to raise 3 young girls. They referenced his public life, the lack of formal custody, the abruptness of his arrival. They even questioned Claire's judgment, suggesting that her health and mental clarity might be compromised after her illness. Nathan's jaw clenched as he listened. He had come prepared to defend himself, but he hadn't expected the accusations to feel so personal. It wasn't just about who had the legal right to raise May, Lily, and Hope. It was about whether or not he was capable of being their father, not in name, but in practice. When it was his turn to speak, Nathan stood slowly, adjusted his tie, and looked directly at the judge. His hands didn't shake. His voice didn't waver. But the emotion underneath was raw and unfiltered. "I didn't know about them," he began. "Not until I walked into that hospital and saw 3 girls sitting outside a room in pink dresses, looking at me with eyes I recognized as my own. Claire made a choice, one I don't agree with, but I understand it. She did what she thought was best. And from the moment I knew, I chose to stay. I chose to become a part of their world, not because it was convenient, but because I realized nothing else I've built matters as much as being their father." He paused, glancing toward the back of the room where the girls waited with Monica, out of view but not out of mind. "They trust me now. Not because I bought them toys or promised them anything, but because I show up. I burn their toast. I forget what day their gym class is. I can't braid hair without messing it up, but I'm learning. Every day I'm learning. And I will never walk away from them. Not again. Not for anything." He sat down without waiting for a reaction. The judge nodded, making notes. Then, quietly, requested to speak with Claire in private, followed by the girls. It was hours before the ruling came. Nathan sat outside the chambers, knees bouncing, fingers pressed together, waiting for the door to open. When it finally did, the judge re-entered the room and asked everyone to return to their seats. The final decision came with quiet, direct authority. Claire would retain full parental rights. Nathan would be granted legal joint custody. Richard Evans' petition for guardianship was denied, though supervised visitation was permitted once a month, at Claire's discretion. Nathan barely heard the rest. Relief flooded him in a way he hadn't prepared for. Not the kind of relief that feels like celebration, but the kind that feels like finally being able to breathe after holding it in for too long. Richard didn't say a word as he left the courtroom. His expression was unreadable, but Nathan no longer cared what he thought. The damage he had tried to cause didn't stick. The truth had spoken louder than strategy. Later that evening, back at the house, the girls waited on the porch, their eyes wide and hopeful. Nathan stepped out of the car and barely had time to close the door before all 3 of them ran toward him. He dropped to one knee and caught them in his arms, pressing his face into the soft mess of their hair. No words. Just 3 little bodies clinging to him like home. That night, Claire joined them for dinner. She was stronger now, her face no longer pale, her movements more sure. They sat around the table, laughter bubbling between bites of pasta and stories about school. Hope pulled her notebook from her backpack and asked Nathan to help her write a song. Lily showed him a picture she'd drawn of their house, with 4 stick figures and a heart above them. May just smiled, quietly, like she finally believed this life was hers to keep. Nathan watched them all, heart full, knowing he hadn't won a battle. He'd been given a beginning. The weeks that followed the court decision were quieter, but not in the way that meant nothing was happening. They were the kind of quiet that meant life was beginning to settle, like dust finding its place after a storm. The girls fell into their routines like they'd always belonged there, and in many ways, Nathan felt like he had finally stepped into the role that had been waiting for him all along. It was no longer about proving himself. It was about showing up, every single day, for the 3 lives that had unexpectedly become the center of his world. Each morning, he woke up to the sound of their footsteps running through the hallway, their voices layered in chaotic harmony as they argued about who stole whose socks or who got the last waffle. There was always noise, always motion, always little fingerprints on the fridge or crayon marks on the dining table. His once silent life now pulsed with energy, and he couldn't imagine ever going back. Claire had moved into a small house nearby, close enough to be part of the girls' everyday lives, far enough to give Nathan space to grow into this new identity without a safety net. They co-parented with unspoken ease, falling into rhythm the way people do when the love between them, though changed, is still real and rooted in something deeper than romance. They spoke almost daily, mostly about the girls, May's new fascination with astronomy, Lily's attempt at organizing a sister band, Hope's quiet journaling sessions on the porch. Sometimes they talked about the past, about how different things might have been, but never with regret. Only with gratitude for the way things had come together now. Nathan surprised himself with how much he enjoyed the simplicity of it all. Picking up groceries with a list scribbled in crayon, learning how to make pancakes without burning them, sitting through a chaotic school play where Lily forgot half her lines and Hope waved at him from the stage the entire time. He started keeping photos on the fridge, something he hadn't done in over a decade. One of his favorite pictures was a blurry snapshot May had taken of him trying to comb her hair while Lily laughed uncontrollably in the background. He hadn't even known she was taking it, but when she handed him the print, shy and proud, he framed it and placed it on his desk. He still worked, he had responsibilities, a company to oversee, but he no longer allowed it to consume him. Monica helped restructure his schedule so that meetings happened between drop-offs and pickups, so that he never had to choose between being in the office and being at the parent-teacher conference. People noticed the change. His board noticed. But no one questioned it. They respected it. Nathan Carter, once known for his unshakable dedication to business, had found something greater to dedicate himself to. One evening, after the girls were asleep, Nathan sat outside on the back porch with Claire. They sipped tea under the soft hum of porch lights, the night wrapped around them like a quiet reassurance. "I used to think I broke everything," Claire said, voice barely above a whisper. "When I left, I thought I was protecting them. But some nights I wondered if I had ruined everything instead." "You didn't," Nathan said gently. "You protected them the best way you knew how. You protected me too, even if I didn't understand it then." Claire looked at him for a long time. "And you became everything I hoped you would be for them." He didn't answer right away. He just looked toward the house, imagining the 3 girls fast asleep inside, their soft breathing filling up the silence of rooms that used to be empty. "They saved me," he said finally. "Not the other way around." They didn't need to say more. The quiet between them was full of peace, of second chances that had somehow worked. Later that week, May came home with a permission slip for a school project called Our Family, Our Story. Each child was supposed to bring in something personal to share, an object, a photo, a memory that represented who they were and where they came from. The night before the presentation, she asked Nathan to help her choose. He showed her the watch Claire had given him years ago, the one he had carried in his pocket the day he met the girls. She held it in her small hands for a long time, then nodded. "This feels right," she said. He walked her to school the next morning, the other 2 girls skipping ahead. At the classroom door, May turned back and whispered, "I'm glad you came to the hospital that day." Nathan smiled. "Me too." Then she disappeared into the crowd of children, clutching a piece of his past in her hand. And Nathan stood there for a moment longer, feeling like, for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The morning of the girl's 8th birthday began with sunlight streaming through the windows and the scent of vanilla pancakes filling the kitchen. Nathan had woken up before dawn, determined to make breakfast himself even though he knew Monica would have gladly handled it. But this was something he needed to do. The house was still quiet, filled with that soft, warm stillness that only came before something special. He had wrapped their gifts the night before, 3 identical boxes with different colored ribbons, each carefully labeled with their names. Inside were lockets, silver and simple, engraved with the words, "Always, no matter what." As he flipped the last pancake onto a plate, he heard footsteps running down the hallway. The girls burst into the kitchen together, their hair still wild from sleep, their eyes shining with anticipation. Lily shouted, "It smells like cake," and Hope wrapped her arms around his waist without a word. May climbed onto a stool and looked at the table, her smile calm and certain. Nathan watched them and felt it again, that quiet sense of awe he had never been able to put into words. A year ago, he hadn't known they existed. Now, he couldn't imagine a life without them. Every chaotic moment, every tear and tantrum and bedtime story had built something between them that felt unbreakable. They ate together, the girls giggling over syrup and planning their own birthday party as if it were a royal event. Later that afternoon, Claire arrived, bringing a cake she'd made herself, chocolate with raspberry filling, exactly the way Lily liked it. They set up balloons in the backyard, hung a banner across the fence, and let the girls invite a few close friends from school. It wasn't a glamorous event by any means, but it was full of color, laughter, and that unmistakable energy that comes when people feel truly loved. As the sun began to set, the girls gathered on a blanket in the grass, tearing open cards and whispering secrets to each other. Nathan watched from the porch, his arms crossed, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Claire came to stand beside him, holding a glass of lemonade, her expression content. "She told me," Claire said, gesturing toward May, "that she wants to be a writer." Nathan nodded. "She already is. She just doesn't know it yet." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the 3 of them laugh so hard they tipped over onto the blanket in a tangle of limbs and squeals. It didn't matter that the yard wasn't perfect, that the fence leaned a little, or that the decorations were crooked. It was real. It was alive. After the party, once the guests had gone home and the backyard had fallen quiet, Nathan brought out the 3 gift boxes and placed them on the kitchen table. The girls gathered around, eyes wide, not expecting more after the cake and games. He knelt down and handed each one their box. "I wanted you to have something to remember," he said. "Something that's just yours." They opened them slowly, carefully. Inside each was a locket, the same shape but with different engravings inside. For May, it read, "You see what others miss." For Lily, "You bring the light." For Hope, "Your quiet is powerful." The girls didn't say anything at first. Then Lily reached forward and hugged him tightly, pressing her cheek to his shoulder. May smiled and held the locket in her hand like something precious. Hope simply nodded and whispered, "Thank you," in a voice so quiet it made his heart ache. That night, after everyone was asleep, Nathan stood in the hallway outside their rooms. He listened to the sounds of soft breathing, the occasional rustle of sheets, the house wrapped in the kind of peace that can't be bought or forced. It had taken him years to find this, to understand that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about presence. It was about returning, over and over, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. It was about showing up when it mattered most. He walked back to his room, opened his nightstand drawer, and placed the extra locket inside, the 4th one he'd had made just in case. It read, "Always, no matter what, just like the others." He didn't know why he kept it. Maybe for the future. Maybe for someone who would need reminding. Or maybe, he thought, it was just for him. Before he turned out the light, he looked around the room and felt it, not pride, not relief, but something simpler. Wholeness. Everything he had once feared had led him here. And finally, he wasn't running anymore. What makes the ending of this story so powerful isn't just the resolution, it's the quiet transformation of a man who had everything, yet didn't realize what he was missing until it looked him in the eyes and called him, Dad. Nathan's journey isn't about a dramatic twist or a grand redemption arc, it's about something deeper and more honest, learning to show up, to stay, to love without conditions. The final chapter isn't wrapped in perfection, but in truth. It reminds us that family doesn't always come when we expect it, but when it does, we have a choice, to run, or to rise. And Nathan chose to rise. That, to me, is the heart of it all.